The Eastern Front, a canvas of unimaginable scale, painted with blood, mud, and the relentless machinery of total war. In the vast, unforgiving expanses from the Baltics to the Black Sea, a symphony of steel clashed, its discordant notes echoing the fate of nations. Among the cacophony, two titans emerged, embodying the very essence of their respective war efforts, the Soviet T-34 medium tank and the German Panzerkampfwagen V Panther. Imagine the scene, summer 1943. The sun, a malevolent eye, beats down on the Ukrainian steppes, shimmering above fields of churned earth and shattered dreams. The air, thick with the smell of cordite and scorched metal, vibrates with the thunder of engines. A line of T-34s, mud-caked and battle-hardened, rolls forward, their 76mm guns spitting defiance. They are crude, certainly, lacking the refined lines of their adversaries, but they are legion. And then, from the dust and haze, a menace emerges. The sleek, powerful silhouette of a panther. Its long, menacing 7.5 Saturn beamed K-42L-70 gun seems to sniff the air, eager for a target. This isn't just a clash of tanks. It's a collision of philosophies, of industrial might, of men and their machines fighting for survival on the deadliest battlefield in human history. For decades, military historians and armchair strategists have grappled with the same tantalizing question. Was the Panther truly the superior tank? On paper, the answer often seems an unequivocal yes. Its sloped armor, potent main gun, and advanced optics promised a technological marvel, designed to sweep aside the Soviet hordes. Yet, the T-34, often derided as primitive, crude, and mass-produced, ultimately won the war. This isn't a contradiction. It's the profound, brutal truth of the Eastern Front. The popular narrative often distorts the reality, presenting the Panther as an undisputed king and the T-34 as a mere peasant. We're here to dismantle that simplistic dichotomy, to delve into the gritty, complex truth. Our core thesis, the recurring motif weaving through this narrative, is elegantly simple, yet brutally profound. The Panther was superior. But the T-34 was everywhere. This isn't just about statistics on a spec sheet. It's about the entire ecosystem of war production lines, logistics, repair depots, crew training, and the strategic vision that deployed these machines. We'll explore how the Panther, a masterpiece of German engineering, was ultimately a luxury Germany couldn't afford, while the T-34, a good enough weapon, became the indispensable hammer that shattered the Wehrmacht. The birth of a legend. The T-34's genesis and early war impact. To understand the T-34, we must first cast our gaze back to the tumultuous interwar period, a crucible of military thought and technological experimentation. Soviet military doctrine, heavily influenced by the likes of Mikhail Tukhachevsky, was fixated on the concept of deep operations, massed tank formations punching through enemy lines, followed by mobile infantry and cavalry exploiting the breach to disrupt the enemy's rear. This wasn't merely a theoretical exercise, it demanded a new breed of tank. A tank capable of rapid movement across vast, often roadless terrain, protected enough to withstand enemy fire, and armed to tackle fortifications and enemy armor. The design philosophy that gave birth to the T-34 was revolutionary, yet pragmatic. Building on the work of American engineer J. Walter Christie, whose revolutionary suspension system had been purchased by the Soviets, the Kharkov Design Bureau under Mikhail Koshkin began to develop what would become the A-20 and A-32 prototypes. Koshkin's genius, however, lay in understanding that simple, effective solutions trumped complex perfection in a nation preparing for total war. The key features of the T-34, which would later shock the world, were baked into its initial design: sloped armor. This was arguably its most defining feature. Inspired by contemporary designs and simple ballistic physics, the T-34's sloped glacis plate front hull dramatically increased effective armor thickness, making it exceptionally difficult for existing anti-tank weapons to penetrate. A 45mm plate sloped at 60 degrees offered the protective equivalent of over 90mm of vertical armor, a staggering advantage. V2 diesel engine. A powerful V12 diesel engine was not just more fuel-efficient than gasoline engines, a crucial logistical advantage, but also less prone to catching fire when hit, significantly increasing crew survivability. This engine, robust and relatively simple, provided excellent power-to-weight ratio. Wide tracks. Unlike the narrower tracks common on many Western European designs, the T-34's broad tracks provided superior flotation over soft ground, snow, and mud, the typical terrain of the Eastern Front. This gave it exceptional cross-country mobility, a tactical edge that would prove invaluable. Christie suspension. While improved and adapted by the Soviets, this suspension system allowed for high speeds and good articulation over rough terrain, vital for the deep operations doctrine. F-34 76.2 mm main gun. At its introduction, this gun was a formidable weapon, capable of penetrating most contemporary German tanks. Then came Operation Barbarossa, June 22, 1941, the German invasion of the Soviet Union. The Wehrmacht, accustomed to rolling over Western European armies with relative ease, suddenly faced a terrifying new reality. Their Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, though tactically well employed, found their main guns often impotent against the T-34's sloped armor. Artillery shells bounced off. Anti-tank guns struggled. German soldiers, accustomed to seeing tanks burn, watched in horror as T-34s absorbed hits and kept coming. The shock was profound. General Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, famously noted, "Until the appearance of the T-34, we had an undisputed superiority regarding tanks. The German Panzer IV, with its 75mm short-barreled gun, could not knock out a T-34. The division's anti-tank guns were ineffective against it." Field Marshal Erich von Manstein described the T-34 as a weapon with which we had nothing comparable. Even Hitler himself, upon seeing captured T-34s, was said to have ordered that they be copied immediately. The T-34 was not merely a tank, it was a psychological weapon, shattering German confidence and revealing a dangerous new paradigm in armored warfare. However, to paint the early T-34 as an infallible superweapon would be a disservice to historical accuracy. It had its flaws, glaring ones at that, born from its rapid development and the exigencies of wartime production. Poor optics. The early T-34s suffered from notoriously bad optics, severely limiting crew situational awareness and target acquisition. German tankers, with their superior Zeiss optics, often saw and fired first. Unreliable transmissions. While the engine was robust, the transmission was a constant headache. Gear changes were difficult and often required brute force. Breakdowns were common. Primitive radio equipment. Early T-34s often lacked radios, relying on flag signals between tank commanders, severely hampering battlefield coordination. This meant individual tanks often fought in isolation, unable to react quickly to changing situations. Cramped crew compartment. The two-man turret, commander also loaded and often acted as gunner, was terribly inefficient, overburdening the commander and reducing overall combat effectiveness. Lack of crew training. The rapid expansion of the Red Army meant many tank crews were rushed through training, lacking the experience and tactical finesse of their German counterparts. Despite these significant imperfections, the initial impact of the T-34 was immense. It was a tangible representation of Soviet industrial potential, a harbinger of the sheer scale of the war to come. Its myth of invincibility, though later challenged, forced Germany to confront a stark reality. Their current tank designs were obsolete. The T-34 had arrived, and the Germans knew they needed an answer, a powerful, devastating answer. And that answer would eventually be the Panther. The shock of encountering the T-34 on the Eastern Front in 1941 sent seismic waves through the German High Command and their tank design bureaus. What had been considered world-beating armored vehicles, the Panzer III and Panzer IV, were suddenly rendered dangerously inadequate. The T-34 presented what became known as the Panther problem, a challenge that demanded an immediate and revolutionary solution. The initial German response was almost desperate. Some even suggested simply copying the T-34 wholesale, a testament to its profound impact. A special commission was dispatched to the front to study captured T-34s and KV-1s, dissecting their strengths and weaknesses. The findings were sobering. Germany's existing tank arsenal was outmatched in several critical areas. The race for a counterweapon was on. Hitler himself, deeply impressed by the T-34, pushed hard for a new design that would incorporate its best features while elevating German engineering to new heights. Two proposals emerged: the WWII 30.02M from MAN, Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg, and the VK 30.02H from Daimler-Benz. While Daimler-Benz's design was a much closer, almost direct copy of the T-34, incorporating a diesel engine and similar hull layout, it was ultimately MAN's proposal that won the contract. Why? MAN's design was seen as a more traditional German approach, emphasizing optics, crew comfort, and a gasoline engine, while still integrating the crucial lessons learned from the T-34, primarily its sloped armor. There was a palpable reluctance within the German military establishment to simply replicate Soviet design, preferring to maintain what they perceived as their own technological superiority. Thus, in late 1942, the Panzerkampfwagen Pfaff Panther was born, initially designated VK 30.2 EMAN. Its design philosophy was a direct, aggressive response to the T-34, aiming to outmatch it in every measurable aspect. It was conceived as a tank hunter, capable of engaging and destroying enemy armor at long ranges, well before the adversary could effectively respond. Key aspects of the Panther's design philosophy and features included sloped armor, Panzer style. While inspired by the T-34, the Panther took the concept to another level. Its frontal glacis plate was a formidable 80 mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees, offering immense protection against almost all contemporary anti-tank weapons, including the T-34's 76 6mm gun. The turret front was also heavily sloped and thick. However, crucially, its side armor was significantly thinner, 40-50 mm, a trade-off for weight and speed, which would prove to be a dangerous vulnerability in close-quarters combat. Long 7.5 cm Tirano 42 L70 gun. This was the Panther's crown jewel. Developed by Rheinmetall, This high-velocity, long-barreled gun was simply devastating. With superior muzzle velocity and advanced tungsten-cored ammunition, it could penetrate the T-34's frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, a range at which the T-34-76 could barely scratch the Panther's paint. Its accuracy was also exceptional, thanks to superior optics and precision manufacturing. Superior optics and fire control. German optical technology, particularly from companies like Zeiss, was unsurpassed. The Panther boasted excellent gunner's sights, allowing for precise targeting and ranging, giving it a significant first-shot advantage in engagements. Powerful Maybach HL-230 proprietary engine, a V12 gasoline engine producing 700 horsepower, gave the Panther impressive speed on roads, up to 46 km/h, and decent cross-country mobility. However, this power came with its own set of problems. Sophisticated suspension. The Panther utilized a complex interleaved road wheel system, Schachtlaufwerk, which, while providing an exceptionally smooth ride and excellent weight distribution for its wide tracks, was notoriously difficult and time-consuming to maintain or repair, especially if inner road wheels were damaged. Ergonomics and crew comfort. Compared to the T-34, the Panther offered a much more spacious and comfortable fighting compartment, particularly for the commander, gunner, and loader in its three-man turret. This allowed for better crew efficiency and reduced fatigue during extended operations. The influence of Russian design on the Panther's genesis cannot be overstated. The very impetus for its existence came from the T-34. The sloped armor, the wide tracks, even the general profile initially considered by Daimler-Benz, all demonstrated how the Germans were forced to acknowledge and adapt lessons from their adversary. It was a rare admission of borrowing from a perceived inferior enemy, a testament to the T-34's disruptive power. However, the Panther was not without its own set of ambitions, clashing with the harsh realities of wartime production and engineering limits. The massive technological leap attempted in its design, driven by desperation and a desire for overwhelming quality, inevitably led to complexity. This complexity, in turn, translated into precision engineering. Every component, from the engine to the transmission, required meticulous craftsmanship and high-quality materials. This was a hallmark of German industrial prowess, but became a bottleneck in mass production. High material costs. The Panther was a heavy tank, around 45 tons, requiring significant quantities of steel, many of which were high-grade alloys. Its optics, its gun, and its powerful engine also consumed vast resources that were becoming increasingly scarce for Germany. Developmental rushing. The urgency of the situation meant that the Panther was rushed into production with insufficient testing. This led to a plethora of mechanical issues, particularly with the engine and transmission, which would plague its operational service and become its true Achilles' heel. The Panther, therefore, represented the pinnacle of German tank design in the mid-war period. Powerful, deadly, and technologically advanced. It was a formidable hunter, certainly, but it was also a complex, demanding machine, born out of necessity and a philosophy that prioritized individual quality over the brutal arithmetic of total war. Its promise on the drawing board was immense. Its reality on the battlefield would be a struggle against both enemy fire and its own inherent mechanical fragility. In the brutal arena of the Eastern Front, the ultimate judge of a tank's worth wasn't a blueprint or a propaganda poster, but cold steel and burning oil. While the Panther was designed to outclass the T-34, the reality of combat presented a far more nuanced picture. Let's break down the direct technical confrontation, analyzing their firepower, armor, mobility, and the less glamorous but equally crucial aspects of optics and crew comfort. Firepower, the punch, and the precision. The Panther's KWK-42L70, the sniper's rifle. The Panther's 7.5 mm KWK-42L70 main gun was, without hyperbole, one of the finest tank guns of World War II. Its long barrel, 70 calibers, imparted a phenomenal muzzle velocity to its APCBC, armor-piercing capped ballistic cap. Rounds, granting it exceptional penetration capabilities. Penetration. Against a T-34-76, the Panther could reliably penetrate the frontal glasses at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters and often up to 2,000 meters. Against the later T-34-85, it still held a significant advantage, being able to punch through the turret front at 1,000 meters and the hull front at even greater distances. Accuracy, coupled with superb German optics, often Zeiss TZF-12A sights, and a stabilized gun mount, the KWK-42 was notoriously accurate. German Panther crews were trained to engage targets at maximum effective ranges, often knocking out T-34s before the Soviet tanks were even within their own effective firing distance. A single well-aimed shot could be decisive. Anecdote: German crews often reported picking off T-34s at ranges where the Soviet return fire seemed to dissipate harmlessly. One German veteran recalled, "We could see the enemy clearly at 2,000 meters, while they barely knew we were there." Then came the flash, and one of them was gone. The T-34's guns, the hammer that evolved. The T-34's main armament underwent a significant evolution, a testament to Soviet pragmatism. F-34, 76.2 mm. Initially, the 76.2 mm F-34 gun, formidable in 1941, found itself increasingly outmatched by the thicker armor of the Panther and later German tanks like the Tiger. While capable of penetrating the Panther's notoriously thin side armor at close ranges, under 500 meters, it struggled mightily against its heavily sloped frontal plate. Frontal engagements for a T-34-76 against a Panther were often suicidal, requiring flanking maneuvers or sheer overwhelming numbers to compensate. ZIS S-53, 85 mm. The introduction of the T-34-85 in late 1943, armed with the more powerful 85 mm ZEIS S-53 gun, and later the D-5T and S-53, was a game-changer. This gun offered significantly improved penetration. While still not equaling the Panther's KWK-42L70 in terms of range or frontal penetration against the Panther, it could now reliably penetrate the Panther's frontal hull at closer ranges, around 500 meters, and its turret front at around 800-1,000 meters. More importantly, it made the T-34-85 a credible threat to the Panther, forcing German crews to be much warier. Tactical impact: the 85 mm gun allowed Soviet tankers to engage Panthers more directly, reducing the absolute range disparity. While the Panther often maintained a first-shot advantage, the T-34-85 could return fire with a much higher probability of success, especially in the chaotic, often close-quarters fighting characteristic of the Eastern Front. Conclusion on firepower: in a pure slugging match at range, the Panther's KWK-42L70 was the undisputed king. Its precision and penetration were unmatched. However, the T-34-85's 85 mm gun closed the gap significantly, turning the hunter into the hunted at closer ranges and providing a much-needed strategic counter. Armor protection: the shield and the weaknesses. Panther, the immovable object, mostly. The Panther's armor scheme was designed to be virtually impenetrable from the front. Frontal armor: with its 80 mm thick glacis plate sloped at 55 degrees, Offering an effective thickness of over 140 mm, the Panther was incredibly tough to crack head-on. Most Soviet anti-tank guns and the T-34-76 found it almost impossible to penetrate, even at point-blank range. The turret front, also heavily sloped and up to 100 mm thick, was equally resilient. Side and rear armor. This was its fatal flaw. The Panther's side armor was a mere 40-50 mm thick and often less sloped, making it highly vulnerable to all Soviet anti-tank weapons, even the 76 mm gun, at typical combat ranges. This critical weakness often forced Panther commanders to avoid exposing their flanks at all costs, severely limiting tactical flexibility. The rear armor was similarly thin. Maneuvering trade-off. The focus on frontal protection meant that Panther crews had to be extremely disciplined and cautious, constantly presenting their strongest aspect to the enemy. This often led to Panthers being caught static or in ambushes where their sides could be targeted. T-34, the well-rounded workhorse. The T-34's armor, while not as thick as the Panther's, was intelligently designed for its weight class. Sloped all around. The genius of the T-34's sloped armor was that it applied to the front, sides, and even portions of the rear. While its effective thickness, ETRBBG 45 mm at 60 degrees on the glacis, was less than the Panther's frontal plate, it provided a good balance of protection for its weight, making it a difficult target for the standard German 50 mm and short 75 mm guns of 1941 to 42. Against the Panther, the 76 mm T-34 stood little chance against the Panther's front. The 85 mm T-34, while still vulnerable frontally to the KWK-42, could often withstand hits from other German guns and could certainly take more punishment than the Panther's sides. Bouncing shots. T-34 crews often recounted lucky bounces off their sloped armor, a testament to its effectiveness in deflecting less powerful rounds. Conclusion on armor. The Panther's frontal armor was superior, making it a terrifying opponent in head-on engagements. However, its Achilles' heel, the thin side armor, was a critical design flaw that Soviet tactics and numerical superiority ruthlessly exploited. The T-34, while less armored overall, presented a more balanced protection scheme that was good enough for its intended role and weight class. Mobility and maneuverability. Grace versus grit. Panther, fast but fragile. On paper, the Panther was a fast tank. Its powerful Maybach HL-230 P30 engine could propel it to speeds of up to 46 km/h on paved roads, making it one of the faster heavy-medium tanks of the war. Road performance. Its road speed was impressive, allowing for rapid strategic redeployments. Cross-country issues. Off-road, however, was a different story. The immense strain on its complex transmission and final drives, combined with its sheer weight, often led to breakdowns. The interleaved road wheel system, while providing a smooth ride, was heavy and prone to clogging with mud or ice, further complicating maintenance. Reliability. Woes. The Panther's single greatest operational weakness was its chronic mechanical unreliability, especially in early production batches. Transmissions failed, engines overheated, and final drives disintegrated. It was not uncommon for a significant percentage of Panther battalions to be non-operational due to mechanical faults, even before engaging the enemy. The famous anecdote from Kursk, where dozens of Panthers broke down en route to the battle, illustrates this perfectly. T-34, the enduring workhorse. The T-34, while perhaps not as fast on pristine roads as the Panther, was undeniably more robust and agile in the unforgiving conditions of the Eastern Front. V2 diesel engine. The V2 diesel, while not as powerful as the Maybach, was incredibly reliable and simpler to maintain. Its torque characteristics were well suited for cross-country movement. Wide tracks and suspension. The T-34's wide tracks and Christie suspension gave it exceptional performance over soft ground, mud, and snow, crucial attributes for a tank operating in Russia. It could traverse terrain that would bog down many other tanks. Simplicity, Freundgreaders, fascist reliability. The less complex drivetrain of the T-34 meant fewer parts to break and easier field repairs. While early transmissions could be clunky and prone to issues, these were largely ironed out, and subsequent models proved remarkably robust. Gets there and back. Soviet tankers might have to wrestle with the gears, but the T-34 had a reputation for getting to the objective and, crucially, getting back, even after sustaining damage. Conclusion on mobility. The T-34 was, without a doubt, the more reliable and adaptable vehicle for the varied and often treacherous terrain of the Eastern Front. While the Panther could be fast, its chronic mechanical fragility severely limited its tactical mobility and strategic availability. The T-34's ruggedness meant it was consistently available for combat, which, as we shall see, was a far more important metric. Optics and crew comfort, the eyes and the endurance. Panther, a better view, a better ride. German optical technology was second to none. The Panther benefited immensely from this. Superior optics. Its commander's cupola offered excellent all-round vision, and the gunner's telescopic sight was crisp and precise, allowing for accurate long-range targeting. This gave Panther crews a significant advantage in spotting enemy tanks and engaging them first. Crew comfort. The spacious three-man turret, commander, gunner, loader, allowed for efficient operation, reducing the workload on individual crew members. The suspension provided a smooth ride, reducing crew fatigue over long periods. T-34, initially blind, later improved. Early T-34s were notoriously deficient in this area. Poor optics. Initial optics were crude, offering limited fields of vision and poor magnification. The commander often had to stick his head out of the hatch to get a decent view, exposing himself to enemy fire. Cramped and loud. The two-man turret in the T-34 T-76 was a significant ergonomic flaw. The commander was overburdened, having to spot targets, command the tank, and load the gun. This significantly slowed the rate of fire and reduced situational awareness. The engine was loud and the ride was bumpy, contributing to crew fatigue. T-34-85 improvements. The introduction of the larger three-man turret in the T-34-85 dramatically improved crew efficiency and comfort. A dedicated loader allowed the commander to focus on commanding, and better optics were gradually introduced, though still not matching the Panther's quality. Conclusion on optics and comfort. The Panther offered a superior working environment and better optical systems, which contributed to its accuracy and crew effectiveness, especially in sustained engagements. The T-34 started with significant disadvantages, but rapidly improved, particularly with the T-34-85, recognizing the critical importance of these factors. Production and material costs. The watchmaker versus the sledgehammer. This is where the philosophical divide truly manifests. Panther. The exquisite but expensive jewel. Producing a Panther was a monumentally complex and resource-intensive undertaking. Complexity. the precision engineering, the sophisticated drivetrain, the high-quality optical components, and the sheer number of parts made the Panther slow and difficult to manufacture. Each tank was, in essence, a finely crafted machine. High costs. It consumed vast amounts of high-grade steel, skilled labor, and precious resources. This meant fewer Panthers could be built, and each loss was a significant blow. Fragility of production. The highly centralized and specialized German industrial base was vulnerable to Allied bombing and resource shortages. Analogy. The Panther was a watchmaker's masterpiece, a bespoke suit tailored for a king. T-34, the mass-produced instrument of war. The T-34 was designed from the outset for mass production under wartime conditions. Simplicity and standardization. Soviet engineers continually simplified the design, streamlining production processes. While not as refined, the emphasis was on getting tanks to the front, not on perfect finish. Welds were rough, interiors were stark, but it worked. Resource efficiency. It used readily available materials and components, reducing reliance on rare alloys. Quantity. Factories, relocated beyond the Urals, churned out T-34s at an astonishing rate, even as the war raged. By the end of the war, over 57,000 T-34s of all variants were produced, a number that dwarfs the approximately 6,000 Panthers. Analogy. The T-34 was a robust sledgehammer, crude but effective, produced by the million for the factory floor of war. Conclusion on production. Germany's commitment to quality and complexity resulted in a magnificent tank, but one that was unsustainable in a war of attrition. The Soviet Union's pragmatic mass production approach with the T-34, even with its initial flaws, meant that for every Panther lost, dozens of T-34s were rolling off the assembly lines. This quantitative advantage would prove to be the most decisive factor of all. In the crucible of total war, a tank's true value isn't just measured by its gun or armor, but by its ability to get to the fight, stay in the fight, and return from the fight. This is where the Panther, for all its technical brilliance, truly faltered, while the T-34, the rough-and-ready workhorse, cemented its operational supremacy. Panther's Achilles' heel. A masterpiece, prone to collapse. The Panther's sophisticated engineering, while delivering impressive performance when everything worked, made it notoriously temperamental and demanding. It was a high-maintenance machine, ill-suited for the brutal, unforgiving conditions of the Eastern Front. Chronic mechanical failures, transmission and final drive issues. This was the Panther's most notorious weakness. The complex 7-speed Maybach-Olvar EG 40-12-16. A transmission and the final drives were notoriously fragile and prone to breaking down under the immense strain of the tank's weight and powerful engine, especially during aggressive maneuvering. Early models were plagued by these issues, often failing within the first 100-200 kilometers of operation. Even with subsequent improvements, these remained significant pain points throughout its service life. Overheating engines. The powerful Maybach HL 230P30 engine, while impressive, had a tendency to overheat, especially when pushed hard. This not only caused breakdowns, but also contributed to engine fires, sometimes leading to the complete loss of the vehicle. Suspension. Woes. While the interleaved road wheel system provided a smooth ride, it was a maintenance nightmare. Mud, ice, and debris could easily clog the tightly packed wheels, freezing solid in winter or requiring immense effort to clear. If an inner road wheel was damaged, Replacing it could require removing several outer wheels, a time-consuming and labor-intensive process, often impossible under battlefield conditions. Fuel consumption. A thirst Germany couldn't quench. The Panther's powerful gasoline engine was a notorious gas guzzler. Its massive thirst, around 400–500 liters per 100 cut-off road, exacerbated Germany's already critical fuel shortages, particularly after 1943. Transporting fuel to the front for a force of Panthers was a logistical nightmare, diverting resources and slowing down operations. This directly impacted their operational range and deployment flexibility. Repair complexity. The mechanic's nightmare. Specialized tools and expertise. Repairing a Panther was not a job for the average field mechanic. It required specialized tools, intricate knowledge of its complex systems, and often highly trained factory technicians. Recovery and transport. A broken-down Panther was an immense logistical burden. Its weight, 45 tons, often meant that multiple heavy recovery vehicles, like the German Panther, itself a complex machine, were needed to tow it. Often, it had to be recovered to a railway head for transport back to distant repair facilities in Germany, effectively taking it out of the fight for weeks or even months. The sheer difficulty of recovering a Panther from a muddy battlefield meant many were simply abandoned and then captured or destroyed. Anecdote. German crews, though proud of their Panthers when they ran, frequently expressed frustration. One veteran recounted, "If it ran, it was invincible. If it didn't, it was a target." Another grimly observed, "We had more Panthers broken down than destroyed by the enemy." This wasn't merely a minor inconvenience, it significantly reduced the effective strength of panzer divisions. A battalion might have 50 Panthers on paper, but only 20–30 might be operational at any given time. T-34's enduring strength, built for the grind. The T-34, in stark contrast, embodied the Soviet design philosophy of good enough and lots of it, prioritizing ruggedness, simplicity, and ease of maintenance in the field. It was built for the brutal grind of the Eastern Front, not for precision parades. Simplicity and robustness. The battlefield survivor. Designed for harsh conditions. The T-34's design incorporated lessons from the challenging Soviet climate and vast distances. Its wide tracks, robust chassis, and powerful diesel engine were perfectly suited for off-road travel in mud, snow, and rough terrain. Fewer moving parts. Compared to the Panther's intricate systems, the T-34's drivetrain, while often crude, especially early transmissions, was simpler, with fewer components to break and fewer points of failure. Diesel engine advantages. The V2 diesel engine was not only more fuel efficient, but also less susceptible to ignition from combat damage, a significant advantage for crew survivability. Diesel fuel was also more readily available within the Soviet Union than high-octane gasoline. Field repairs, the Cinderella of the battlefield. Ease of maintenance. The T-34 was designed for ease of field repair, even by less trained crews and mechanics. Components were generally accessible, and the philosophy was to fix it quickly with whatever was available rather than meticulously. Keep it running mentality. Soviet repair crews were masters of improvisation. Damaged parts were often salvaged from other wrecked tanks, or even fabricated on the spot. A T-34 that might look like a write-off could often be patched up and sent back into the fray within hours or days. Anecdote. A famous Soviet tank mechanic's quote captures this spirit. The T-34 was like a good peasant woman, simple, sturdy, and always ready to work, even with a few holes in her apron. One memoir described how a damaged T-34, missing a road wheel and with a shrapnel-riddled engine, was patched up with scrap metal and a borrowed engine part, then sent back to the front within 48 hours. Parts interchangeability, a logistical dream. While German manufacturing prided itself on precision, Soviet mass production often meant less stringent tolerances. This had a surprising benefit. Parts, though perhaps not perfectly interchangeable, were often close enough to fit, allowing for rapid cannibalization from damaged tanks. This decentralized parts sourcing, combined with simplified logistics, meant that T-34s spent less time awaiting specialized components. Conclusion on reliability and logistics. This was arguably the T-34's most decisive advantage. The Panther, a technical marvel, was a logistical nightmare and a mechanical liability. Its time spent in combat was often dwarfed by the hours or days spent broken down or in transit for repairs. The T-34, while not immune to breakdowns, was inherently more robust, easier to fix in the field, and could be returned to action much faster. In a war of attrition, operational readiness is paramount, and here the T-34 consistently outmaneuvered its more sophisticated foe. A tank that is broken down, no matter how powerful its gun or thick its armor, is merely a static target. Beyond the steel and engines, tanks are merely tools. Their effectiveness is ultimately determined by the doctrines that guide their deployment, the tactics employed by their commanders, and the proficiency of the men who crew them. Here, the Eastern Front presented a stark contrast between two fundamentally different approaches to mechanized warfare. German Panzer doctrine, the elite hammer drained by attrition. Germany's initial success in World War II was largely attributed to its revolutionary blitzkrieg doctrine, which emphasized speed, surprise, and overwhelming force at the point of attack, spearheaded by integrated panzer divisions. Emphasis on quality and combined arms. German doctrine stressed the importance of superior training, excellent leadership, and well-coordinated combined arms operations. Tanks, infantry, artillery, air support working in unison. Each tank was seen as a precision instrument, to be used skillfully and decisively. Panzer commanders like Guderian and Manstein were pioneers in this field, and their early successes were legendary. Elite crews. Initially, German tank crews were among the best trained in the world, with extensive experience, rigorous selection, and a strong esprit de corps. They were taught to exploit tactical opportunities, flank enemy positions, and use their tanks' strengths, like superior optics and guns, to maximum effect. The diminishing pool. However, the relentless attrition of the Eastern Front began to take its toll. The best crews, leaders, and mechanics were lost, and replacements were rushed through abbreviated training. The quality advantage, though still present in units like the Waffen-SS and Großdeutschland divisions, gradually eroded as the war dragged on, and the demand for fresh manpower became insatiable. By 1944–45, many German tank crews, even in Panther units, were considerably less experienced than their earlier counterparts. Tactical flexibility, strategic constraint. German tactics often relied on bold thrusts and encirclements. When Panthers were available and operational, they were used as formidable spearheads or as mobile reserves, capable of exploiting weak points or blunting Soviet counterattacks. But their limited numbers and mechanical unreliability often constrain this flexibility, forcing commanders to be overly cautious with their precious assets. Soviet Deep Operations Doctrine. The avalanche of steel. Soviet doctrine, as mentioned earlier, was focused on deep operations, massive, multi-echeloned assaults designed to rupture enemy defenses and penetrate deep into their rear, paralyzing their command and control. The T-34 was the perfect embodiment of this strategy. Massed forces and shock. Unlike the German emphasis on precision, the Soviets embraced the concept of overwhelming numerical superiority. Tank armies, often comprising hundreds of T-34s, were designed to deliver a devastating hammer blow. Losses were expected and, to a degree, factored into the strategic calculus, particularly in the desperate early years of the war. T-34 as the spearhead. The T-34 was the ideal vehicle for this doctrine. Relatively fast, capable of covering vast distances, and numerous enough to constitute the iron fist of the Red Army. It was a tool for breakthrough and exploitation, relying on momentum and sheer weight of numbers to achieve objectives. Learning and adapting. Early Soviet tactical deficiencies, poor coordination, lack of initiative at lower levels, were brutally exposed in 1941–42. However, the Red Army learned rapidly. By 1943, with the introduction of the T-34-85 and improved radio communications, Soviet tank tactics became far more sophisticated. Commanders learned to combine T-34s with self-propelled guns, Su-85, Su-100, ISU-152, and infantry, using flanking maneuvers, night attacks, and overwhelming barrages to compensate for any individual tank's shortcomings. Crew training. From raw recruits to battle-hardened veterans. Panther crews, the burden of excellence. Panther crews underwent extensive training, learning to master their complex machines and leverage their gun and armor advantages. They were taught to identify weak points on Soviet tanks, engage at maximum range, and maintain formation. However, the sheer mechanical complexity of the Panther meant that even with good training, breakdowns were common, and skilled mechanics were always in short supply. As the war progressed, the quality of replacement crews inevitably declined. T-34 crews, forged in fire. Soviet tank crew training, especially in the early war, was often rudimentary and rushed. New recruits were sometimes given only a few weeks of instruction before being thrown into the inferno of the front. They were taught the basics of driving, shooting, and maintaining their T-34s, often learning the finer points of survival through bitter experience. Attrition and improvement. This high turnover rate meant that while many T-34 crews were initially green, those who survived became incredibly hardened and skilled. By 1943–44, the Red Army had a corps of highly experienced tank commanders and gunners, often serving in battle-tested units of the Guards tank armies. These veterans knew the T-34 inside and out, understood its limitations, and, crucially, knew how to fight effectively as a collective. Initiative. Despite a reputation for rigid command, Soviet crews often displayed remarkable initiative in combat, especially at lower levels, making snap decisions to exploit Panther vulnerabilities or counter German ambushes. The quantity over quality paradox, the decisive advantage. This isn't merely a catchy phrase, it's the strategic cornerstone of the T-34's ultimate triumph. Numerical superiority. For every Panther produced, the Soviets churned out roughly 10 T-34s. This sheer quantitative advantage was staggering. It meant that Soviet commanders could afford to take greater risks, absorb higher losses, and launch attacks with overwhelming numbers, knowing that replacements were continually flowing to the front. Overwhelming the enemy. The psychological impact of facing endless waves of T-34s was immense for German troops. Even if a Panther could knock out several T-34s, there were always more coming. This relentless pressure demoralized German forces and stretched their resources to breaking point. Strategic flexibility. The ability to deploy vast numbers of T-34s allowed the Red Army to achieve strategic breakthroughs across multiple sectors, pinning down German reserves and preventing them from concentrating against a single Soviet thrust. The everywhere factor meant that the T-34 dictated the pace and scale of the war. Example: a German unit might have a handful of operational Panthers, each capable of destroying several T-34s, but if those Panthers faced 50, 100, or even 200 T-34s, the outcome was inevitable. Even if 10 or 20 T-34s were lost, the remaining tanks would achieve the objective. The cost of victory for the Soviets was high in blood and steel, but they could afford it. Germany could not. Conclusion on doctrine and tactics. German doctrine emphasized quality, precision, and elite execution, a philosophy that excelled in smaller, more contained conflicts. However, the vast, brutal scale of the Eastern Front, with its endless demands for manpower and materiel, favored the Soviet approach of mass, resilience, and adaptability. The T-34, a good enough tank that could be produced in overwhelming numbers and rapidly integrated into mass operations, became the perfect instrument for the Soviet doctrine of total war, ultimately overwhelming the more sophisticated but numerically disadvantaged Panther. The theoretical differences between the T-34 and the Panther and their respective doctrines were brutally tested in the crucible of real combat. Examining key engagements on the Eastern Front reveals how the T-34's quantitative and operational advantages often negated the Panther's qualitative superiority. Kursk, July 1943. The Panther's bloody debut. The Battle of Kursk was intended by the Germans to be a decisive counteroffensive, a massive pincer movement to encircle Soviet forces and regain the strategic initiative. It marked the Panther's operational debut, a grand stage for Germany's wonder weapon. Panther's performance, unleashed in significant numbers, around 200 at the outset of the battle for Operation Citadel, the Panther was expected to punch through Soviet anti-tank defenses with ease. Its powerful 7.5 cm 42 L-70 gun indeed proved devastating against T-34-76 and Soviet anti-tank guns at long ranges. Reports from German crews boasted of multiple T-34 kills, often from distances where they were invulnerable. Mechanical catastrophe. However, the rush to deploy the Panther led to a shocking display of mechanical unreliability. Dozens of Panthers broke down en route to the battle, suffering from catastrophic transmission and final drive failures. Of the 200 operational Panthers at the start, only 40 were still running after just 2 days of fighting. Most of the losses were due to mechanical breakdowns, not enemy action. This severely crippled the German offensive, denying them the concentrated punch they desperately needed. T-34's resilience. Facing this new threat, T-34-76 crews, though outmatched in a head-on duel, employed classic Soviet tactics, mass attacks, flanking maneuvers, and night operations to close the distance. They sought to exploit the Panther's thin side armor, or engage them in chaotic close-quarters brawls, where numbers and agility could compensate for individual firepower. The sheer volume of T-34s, often supported by dug-in anti-tank artillery and self-propelled guns, meant that even if Panthers knocked out several, the Soviet advance continued. Outcome: Kursk was a tactical and strategic defeat for Germany. While the Panther showed flashes of its destructive potential, its operational unreliability utterly undermined its impact. The Soviets, despite heavy losses, had weathered the storm, primarily because their simpler, more numerous T-34s and robust logistical train could sustain the fight. Kursk proved that a technically superior tank that spends more time in repair depots than on the battlefield is ultimately a failure. Winter 1943–44. The mud and snow test. Following Kursk, the Red Army launched a series of relentless offensives that pushed the Wehrmacht steadily westward. This period, characterized by vast tracts of mud, the Rasputitsa, and bitter winter conditions, highlighted the operational disparities between the two tanks. Panther's struggle. The heavy Panther, with its complex suspension and sensitive drive train, struggled immensely in the deep mud and snow. Its interleaved road wheels became clogged, freezing solid in sub-zero temperatures, rendering many immobile. Recovery was often impossible. The thin side armor also made them vulnerable to close-range attacks in the reduced visibility of winter or night. T-34's advantage. The T-34, with its wide tracks and simpler, more robust construction, was far better suited to these conditions. While not immune to the elements, its cross-country mobility was superior, and its diesel engine performed more reliably in the cold. Soviet offensives during these harsh seasons caught the Germans off guard, largely because the Red Army's mechanized forces, spearheaded by T-34s, could still operate effectively. Strategic retreat. As the Wehrmacht was forced into continuous retreat, Panthers often had to be abandoned due to mechanical breakdown or lack of fuel. Their inability to keep pace with the fighting front or be easily recovered meant that precious assets were regularly lost, often without ever firing a shot against the enemy. Operation Bagration, summer 1944. The avalanche that crushed the Wehrmacht. This massive Soviet offensive in Belarus was arguably the most devastating defeat in German military history, shattering Army Group Center. It represented the full maturation of Soviet deep operations doctrine, spearheaded by the T-34-85. Overwhelming force. By 1944, the T-34-85 was the predominant Soviet tank, offering a significant upgrade in firepower. The Red Army deployed staggering numbers of these tanks, thousands against a German force that was numerically inferior and already reeling from years of attrition. Panthers' inability to stem the tide. Though Panthers were present, their numbers were far too few to make a strategic difference. Even if individual Panthers performed well, knocking out several T-34s, they were simply overwhelmed by the sheer, relentless flood of Soviet armor. They were like individual rocks trying to stop a tsunami. Exploitation. The T-34-85s, organized into formidable tank armies, punched through the German lines, exploiting the breaches to advance rapidly and encircle entire German divisions. The speed and scale of the Soviet advance were unprecedented, showcasing how a reliable mass-produced tank could translate into strategic victory. Outcome. Bagration was a catastrophe for Germany, leading to the collapse of their front and the loss of hundreds of thousands of men and vast quantities of equipment. The T-34-85, in its overwhelming numbers and operational readiness, was the primary instrument of this cataclysm. Berlin, April-May 1945, Urban Brawl, and the Final Chapter. The climactic battle for Berlin represented the final brutal chapter of the war, a desperate urban struggle where the strengths and weaknesses of both tanks were put to the ultimate test. T-34-85's adaptability. In the close-quarters fighting of a ruined city, the T-34-85's agility, lower profile, and good all-round armor, compared to the Panther's side vulnerability, made it a highly effective urban combat vehicle. Its 85mm gun was more than capable of engaging German tanks and fortifications at short ranges. Soviet commanders learned to use tanks in conjunction with storm groups of infantry, clearing streets, building by building. Panther's last stand. Only a handful of Panthers remained operational, often fighting desperate delaying actions. While still capable of inflicting heavy damage, their numbers were negligible. In urban environments, their long gun was sometimes a hindrance in tight streets, and their thin side armor was easily exposed to German infantry with Panzerfausts and Panzerschrecks, as well as to Soviet tanks ambushing them from close range. Symbolic end. The sight of T-34-85s rolling through the streets of Berlin, with Soviet flags hoisted on their antennas, was a powerful symbol of victory, achieved through relentless determination and a tank that had proven its worth on every battlefield from Moscow to the Reichstag. Conclusion on key battles. These engagements illustrate that while the Panther could achieve tactical superiority in specific instances, especially long-range defensive engagements, its chronic mechanical fragility and Germany's inability to produce it in sufficient numbers ultimately rendered it strategically ineffective. The T-34, particularly the T-34-85, was the omnipresent hammer that delivered the decisive blows, relentlessly pushing the front westward, adapting to all conditions, and absorbing losses while continually being replaced. One of the T-34's most enduring strengths was its capacity for adaptation and continuous improvement. Unlike the Panther, which remained largely unchanged, save for minor production variants, due to its inherent complexity and Germany's deteriorating industrial capacity, the T-34 was a living design, constantly evolving to meet the brutal demands of the battlefield. T-34-76 to T-34-85, the crucial upgrade. The initial T-34-76, while revolutionary in 1941, faced a growing threat from new German tanks like the Panther and Tiger. Its 76.2mm F-34 gun, once potent, was increasingly struggling against the formidable frontal armor of these new adversaries. Soviet High Command recognized this critical vulnerability, leading to the development of the T-34-85 in late 1943. This was not a completely new tank, but a masterful evolution of the existing design, a testament to pragmatic wartime engineering. The key changes were transformative. New, larger, three-man turret. This was the most significant improvement. The original two-man turret of the T-34-76 had severely overburdened the commander, who had to spot targets, command the tank, and load the main gun. The new, larger turret, initially designed for the KV-85 and IS-1 heavy tanks, accommodated a dedicated loader. This dramatically improved the tank's combat efficiency by increasing rate of fire. With a dedicated loader, the 85mm gun could be fired much faster, often doubling the rate of fire in combat. Improving situational awareness. The commander was now free to focus solely on command, observation, and target acquisition, significantly enhancing battlefield effectiveness. Better optics. The new turret also allowed for improved optics, and a more effective commander's cupola, closing some of the gap with German tanks. Powerful 85mm ZIS S-53 gun and D5T S-53. This was the T-34's answer to the Panther's KWK-42 L-70. While it didn't fully match the Panther's gun in terms of long-range penetration, the 85mm gun was a substantial upgrade from the 76.2mm credible threat. It could reliably penetrate the Panther's frontal hull armor at ranges of around 500 meters and its turret front at 1,000 meters. More importantly, it could destroy the Panther's vulnerable side armor at almost any combat range. Balanced capabilities. The T-34-85, therefore, achieved a far better balance of firepower, armor, and mobility, making it a highly effective and versatile medium tank. It wasn't just a threat to Panthers, but could also engage Tigers and other German heavy armor more effectively than its predecessor. Improved communications. Alongside the new turret, better radio equipment became standard, dramatically improving intertank and unit-level communication, allowing for more coordinated tactics. The impact of the T-34-85 was immediate and profound. It arrived on the front lines in large numbers from early 1944, just in time for the great Soviet offensives. It closed the performance gap with the Panther to a remarkable degree, especially considering its continued ease of production and maintenance. It represented the ideal blend of practical engineering, mass production, and sufficient combat effectiveness, a truly optimal design for total war. Why the Panther couldn't evolve as easily? In stark contrast, the Panther, for all its initial brilliance, found itself in an evolutionary dead end. Complexity as a constraint. Its intricate design, high manufacturing tolerances, and reliance on specialized components made any significant redesign or upgrade incredibly difficult and time-consuming. Germany simply did not have the luxury of halting Panther production for extensive retooling or redesign. Germany's dwindling industrial capacity. By 1944, German industry was under immense pressure from Allied strategic bombing campaigns, severe shortages of raw materials, especially alloy steels and fuel, and a shrinking pool of skilled labor. Focusing on producing the existing complex Panther was already a struggle. Attempting to introduce a radically upgraded version was simply unfeasible. Perfect is the enemy of good enough. The German pursuit of absolute technical superiority, while producing formidable individual machines, ironically hindered their ability to adapt and mass-produce. They were caught in a trap of their own making. The disposable tank philosophy versus precision instrument. The T-34's continuous incremental evolution was part of a broader Soviet disposable or expendable tank philosophy, though not in a derogatory sense. It was designed to be produced quickly, get to the front, fight aggressively, and if lost, be replaced. Each loss, while regrettable, did not represent an irreplaceable catastrophe. This mindset permeated its design. Robust, relatively simple, easy to maintain, and capable of being produced in vast numbers, ensuring that the Soviet tank fleets remained robust despite heavy combat losses. The Panther, by contrast, was a precision instrument, a costly, rare asset. Its loss was a significant blow, not easily replaced. This difference in philosophical approach to design, production, and deployment profoundly shaped their respective fates on the Eastern Front. The human element. Tankers' perspectives. Behind every steel plate and roaring engine were men who lived, fought, and often died within these machines. Their experiences offer a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the realities of the T-34 versus Panther duel. German tankers on the Panther. Pride, frustration, and a lingering fear. German Panther crews often felt a profound sense of pride in their tanks. They knew they operated a formidable machine, capable of destroying almost any Soviet tank from a safe distance. The king of the battlefield. When it ran. Many expressed awe at its gun and frontal armor. A common sentiment was that a Panther, if it was running and in a good position, was virtually unstoppable. When the gun fired, you knew something was going to cease to exist, one Panther gunner recalled. The frustration of breakdown. However, this pride was constantly tempered by intense frustration over its mechanical unreliability. Stories abound of Panthers breaking down en route to battle or succumbing to mechanical failure during a crucial engagement. We feared breaking down more than we feared the Ivan's tanks sometimes, a German tank commander lamented. The burden of recovery and the shame of abandoning a broken Panther haunted many. The endless waves. There was also a deep, gnawing psychological toll from facing the seemingly endless numbers of T-34s. Even after knocking out several, the realization that more were always coming could be profoundly demoralizing. You destroy 3, 5, maybe even 10. Then you look, and there are 20 more, an officer recounted, expressing the futility of individual heroism against overwhelming odds. Soviet tankers on the T-34, ruggedness, resilience, and a touch of dark humor. Soviet T-34 crews, initially often green and poorly equipped, developed a deep, if sometimes begrudging, affection for their tanks. Our iron coffin, the T-34-76, particularly in the early war, was often referred to as an iron coffin due to high losses and initial vulnerabilities. Yet it was their iron coffin, a symbol of national resistance, love for its ruggedness. As the war progressed, and especially with the T-34-85, crews grew to appreciate its ruggedness, its ability to take a hit, and its capacity to keep fighting. It might be crude, it might be loud, but it always got us there, and it always brought us back, usually. One T-34-85 driver quipped. Stories of desperate field repairs, of welding plates from wrecked tanks onto their own, or driving for miles with damaged suspension, are common. Grit and ingenuity. Soviet tankers were masters of improvisation. Facing the superior optics of German tanks, they developed tactics of aggressive, close-range engagement, often charging through enemy fire to negate the Panther's long-range advantage. Night attacks, using the T-34's better all-terrain mobility and the element of surprise, became a hallmark of Soviet tactics. The power of numbers. There was a quiet confidence in their numbers. They knew that even if they faced technically superior tanks, their sheer mass could overwhelm the enemy. One T-34 might not win, but 20 T-34s will, was a sentiment often shared, reflecting a grim but effective understanding of the strategic realities. The psychological impact. The psychological impact of the duel went beyond individual encounters. For the Germans, the Panther symbolized a desperate attempt to regain technical superiority, but its failures amplified the sense of a losing war. For the Soviets, the T-34, from its early shock value to its final triumphant advance into Germany, embodied the resilience, sacrifice, and ultimate victory of the Red Army. It became more than just a tank. It was a legend. We began this journey by posing a question that has long captivated military enthusiasts. Was the Panther truly superior? And if so, how did the T-34, a seemingly lesser machine, emerge victorious? Having meticulously dissected their genesis, technical specifications, operational realities, and the human experiences within them, the answer becomes clear, albeit nuanced. Reaffirm the thesis: quality versus availability. Our core thesis holds true. The Panther was superior, but the T-34 was everywhere. The Panther, a tactical masterpiece, a strategic burden. The Panther, undoubtedly, was a magnificent fighting machine when it worked. Its potent 7.5 cm 42 L-70 gun, coupled with its formidable frontal armor and excellent optics, made it a deadly opponent, capable of destroying any Soviet tank from significant ranges. It represented the pinnacle of German engineering and a compelling argument for qualitative superiority. However, its immense complexity, chronic mechanical unreliability, staggering fuel consumption, and demanding logistical footprint turned it from a tactical asset into a strategic burden. Germany simply could not afford to produce enough of them, nor could it keep the ones it had consistently operational on the vast, brutal Eastern Front. A tank broken down on the side of the road, no matter how powerful its gun, is just a target. The T-34, a strategic triumph, a battlefield workhorse. The T-34, from its revolutionary sloped armor and diesel engine to its later iteration as the T-34-85, was the embodiment of pragmatic, wartime design. It was never about perfection, it was about good enough, reliable, and, most crucially, mass-producible. It could operate in the most punishing conditions, be repaired with ingenuity in the field, and was constantly rolling off assembly lines in numbers that dwarfed anything the Germans could muster. Its evolution into the T-34-85 closed the performance gap significantly, providing a balanced, capable tank that could challenge the Panther directly while maintaining its operational advantages. The T-34 wasn't just a tank, it was a factory on tracks, a symbol of Soviet industrial resilience and an ever-present force. The ecosystem of war. Beyond the tank itself, the outcome of the T-34 versus Panther duel was never solely about the tanks as individual machines. It was about the entire ecosystem of war that supported them. Production capacity. The Soviet Union's ability to produce over 57,000 T-34s compared to Germany's approximately 6,000 Panthers speaks volumes. Quantity has a quality all its own in a war of attrition. Logistics and maintenance. The T-34's superior reliability, ease of field repair, and simpler logistical chain ensured that a far greater percentage of Soviet tanks were available for combat at any given moment. This operational readiness was a critical, often overlooked factor. Doctrine and tactics. Soviet deep operations doctrine, reliant on mass and overwhelming force, perfectly leveraged the T-34's strengths. German doctrine, while brilliant, became unsustainable when facing a numerically superior, rapidly adapting enemy. Human and industrial resources. The vast human and industrial resources of the Soviet Union allowed them to absorb catastrophic losses and still maintain the initiative, continuously feeding the front with men and machines. Germany, fighting on multiple fronts and facing dwindling resources, simply lacked this depth. The everywhere factor. The decisive hammer. The sheer numerical advantage, combined with the T-34's rugged reliability and adaptability, allowed it to be the omnipresent hammer of the Red Army. It could be found in every major offensive, in every breakthrough, in every desperate defensive stand. It dictated the pace of the war, forcing the Germans to react, to commit their scarce resources, and ultimately to be overwhelmed. The sight of endless T-34s was not just a physical threat, it was a psychological weapon, a constant reminder to the German soldier that they were fighting a losing battle against an inexhaustible foe. Legacy. A tale of two philosophies. The T-34 stands as a testament to the power of pragmatic engineering and the effectiveness of a good-enough weapon produced in overwhelming numbers for total war. It became a symbol of Soviet industrial might and wartime resilience, forever etched into the annals of military history as the tank that broke the Wehrmacht. The Panther, conversely, remains a symbol of brilliant, almost visionary, technological overreach. It was a magnificent creation, a truly formidable tank hunter, but one that was unsustainable, too complex, and too demanding for the nation that birthed it under increasingly desperate circumstances. Its story is a cautionary tale about the limits of qualitative superiority when pitted against the brutal realities of mass production, logistics, and the overwhelming scale of a world war. The duel between the T-34 and the Panther was not merely a clash of steel, but a collision of two fundamentally different approaches to mechanized warfare. In the end, it was the tank that was everywhere, the reliable, adaptable, and endlessly replenished workhorse that ultimately crushed the technically superior but ultimately unsustainable hunter.